Do anything else. I just keep looking down here. One of my cousins is here, Kathleen Smith, and we both come from one of the survivors, Supu, who was from the original village of Petaluma. And just a story, it's in the book, and Kathleen is also a descendant of Supu. She comes from, our great-great-grandfathers were half-brothers. Hers was the good guy, the family man. Mine was the medicine man with a lot of love medicine, 42 different children. So I'll talk bad about my side of the family and talk good about yours, Kathleen.
I'm so in love with your book, Greg. It's like, yeah, and if I could start even with a criticism, I almost desire or wish for a family tree somehow diagrammatically explaining all of that, but that's just my rational mind. Yeah, I guess that leads
the next one.
Segue to my introduction, which would be the son of the astrophysicist, right? Dr. Kaufmann's son was going to be a mathematician, and of course, my mother had a lot to say to that. Also, as a clinical psychologist, growing up in Danville at the base of Mount Diablo, and my journey has been tumultuous to say the least, filled with passionate valleys and peaks, navigating this terrain of ethical occupation, you could say, which is the central question of my work. How do I be more from this place? And one of the things that I've been thinking about really is the nature of language, and the nature of language, or specifically how when you have it's sort of a geographic fact around the world, when you have more indigenous languages in a smaller and smaller geographic area, the biodiversity necessarily increases in a 1-to-1 factor. Here we are. I appreciated the land acknowledgement. The Mukwema Nation has been searching for federal recognition for almost 15 years now. Chochenyo, Huichun, I guess the ethnonym that is being used to describe the larger people of the Bay Area is the Ohlone, but then we have that language. We have what was the Karkeen language of the people of the northern Contra Costa, and then we have the Tamlin and the Miwok, even beyond that, out by Diablo, which is like 3 distinct languages. And that idea, I mean, we're talking about land here today, that idea of like potentially being born, living your whole life, and dying within the same spot because of the abundance of the biodiversity and the ability to read that land, to talk to the plants, to name the plants, right, is such a it's a concept that's haunted me my whole life.
It's the way we lived. You had to read and know the landscape basically so that it would sustain you, but it was a way of reading it and understanding it. For instance, we would look at the elderberry trees, and from the time they bloomed to the time the fruit dropped, you didn't eat shellfish. That was signals. Now, who would understand that connection unless you've been here, as we said, since time millennium? I mean, we've been here forever. So it's that kind of knowing. And you mentioned the language, and I just want to clarify for people. Yeah, the languages, we were classified by language families. There was no such thing as Pomo or Coast Miwok. We didn't. Those were ethnographer classifications. And just within the Coast Miwok, there's 3 variations of the language that are intelligible. But in Pomo, there's 6 or 7 that are not very mutually intelligible, but just within that language family. That's a Hokan language. And it goes all the way down in spots to Oaxaca. The Oaxacan people speak the Hokan language. So you've got these connections of all these languages. All the languages, families that are found in the New World are found somewhere in California. So again, this is an interesting phenomena. And talk about diversity. The diversity of the mind, the diversity of the landscape is reflected in the diversity of languages. Those old people spoke living in an area, as you said, maybe 5 miles in circumference where they lived, still spoke 10 or 15 languages, often as different as English is from Cantonese.
Right.
The Hokan languages of the Pomo are as different from the Penutian or Coast Miwok languages as Urdu is from English, but they spoke those languages. I have a PhD, I can hardly speak two.
Now, the languages themselves, but inside the languages, the naming of things, processes, and relationships in nature on a very ecological, historical, ecological level. As a one trained in the Occidental tradition, right? I've got like names for this plant here, where we have the common name, which means nothing, and then the Linnaean binomial nomenclature, which just refers to a taxonomic reality. I mean, there's information in there, but that information is specifically historical in reference to its own biology, right? So it's limited in that way too, to its ecological application. Now, one of the things that you told me that is just ringing in my head is the idea, like, you have to remember the plant's name, or the plant won't remember the people and forget how to feed the people.
That's right. The old people always said, if you forget the plants or you forget the land, it will forget you. And again, the other thing that to think about, Obi, is just you're talking about units when you classify, but we don't see the plants and nature in units. We saw it in connections.
Yeah.
Things connected to everything else. And so that's a whole different way of seeing, and you connected to that. You connected to those things. You're not separate from that. So the story of our great-grandmother might be in one of these plants here, and it reminds me, and somehow I'm knowing myself in relationship to that, and my sense of the world gets broader and broader. And think too of the dominance, just Spanish and English. Those languages are, they're invasive languages. They're new. They're invasive languages. It was so funny. I was getting a PhD at Stanford, and I had to try to convince, my PhD directors that English could qualify as one of my foreign languages.
Yeah. That's good. That's good. And I wonder too, though, my work as a conciliant philosopher, if you will, right? I'm really sort of bringing in these different disciplines, finding out how, almost like drawing Venn diagrams, how they overlap to approximate meaning in my own heart as it's relevant to my own story, which as a ecologist is my calling. I mean, this is in no way a job. This is this is a vocation. This is something that I'm called to do by the mountain that I love. That I am wondering if in this era of, I guess I'm riffing off of what you were saying about the relationships of things, because this is becoming a scientific truth as well. As we're studying more and more the activity of what's being called biological dark matter in the rhizosphere, the mycorrhizal mat, we're seeing that it's challenging our very notions of taxonomic biology. Like you were talking about units, these are all different species, right? But when you have the lichenizing effect of communities in the soil, we have a new model that is not Darwinian, that is something else, as if we're waiting for a new Darwin to describe. And I think that new Darwin is going to be fluent in traditional ecological knowledge.
Well, I always worry. I want you scientists to relax. Remember, science is a story itself. and all stories are living. And so you have to take consequence and responsibility for that story, whatever it may be telling.
Right.
The danger is when it's only one story. That's when we get into trouble. And so I think the stories mixing, I mean, you mentioned Darwin, but well, let's look at Einstein. Remember, he was the one that showed us that you can see the universe in waves as easily as you can see it in units.
Right. Right.
And then my great aunt, Essie Parrish, a doctoring woman, she in the 50s, she would be doctoring and she would describe what today would be cancer. And she said, it's like the virus is like insects when she was doctoring. She says it's like insects hatching in the body, eggs and insects hatching. And if you look today under a microscope, that's what it looks like. So these things aren't antithetical. They're things of power and knowledge, and the question is how we use them and to what end.
Well, that's a good segue to start talking about where you find hope, Greg. I mean, I think that I wrestle with it every day, and I know I encounter audience members who are white knuckling it through this climate anxiety every day as we figure out how to navigate the dreaded bottlenecks of the 21st century, realizing that California 200 years ago will look as different then as California 200 years ago does to us now. And so hope. Where do you find it? Like hope to action, right?
Hope to action. The big couple things, Obi, that come to mind. We have to be careful that the bad news and what we're being told doesn't rob us of the possibility of the full present. And I'm an addict. My addiction, I watch the news in the morning. But that can really defeat me. But then I see a hummingbird come to the window and says, I'm still here. What's wrong with you?
Yeah, everything.
The thing is, what's happening is we're getting up in the media, and it's the consequence of a long history of separation from everything. And the challenge of the now is to connect. If we're all lemmings going over the cliff, we still have two choices, Obi. One is to drop off with the rest, or the other one is to scream as we go and say, hey, there's another way. I want to live each day to scream.
I'll live each day to scream too. Yes, the becoming story. I love the almost double meaning of the title of your book. It's a very becoming story, and this is becoming story.
Yeah.
Now, it's all gonna burn. It's interesting to note that thinking about the nature of language and the words that we use and the colonizing words that we use to impose a paradigm, if you will, across California. Words like wilderness, for example. It's interesting. I sit on the board of the California Wilderness Coalition, and I'm always wrestling with them. I really appreciate all the work they're doing for accessibility, inclusivity, and expansion and resistance against wanton urban development. But at the same time, the idea of sequestering nature away from human agency, as it has played out since really there were the forests as we know them in California. The forests of California are really only about as old as the ancient pyramids, as we understand their present biogeography, and that's exactly in line with the archaeological evidence of what we understand Paleo-Indian societies and how they expanded across the California floristic province. Of course, that was after the megafaunal extinctions of the early Holocene, right, when there was a dozen species of animal living here that weighed more, herbivores that weighed more than a ton, from bison to mammoth to sloth, to the largest camel that ever lived, 9 feet tall, right? So, so this idea of like wilderness, what do you think about that? Or even, I wrestle with the word nature, and then we have all of these, because nature's never really existed in California apart from humanity. To separate that out in a very sort of Cartesian way, right? When Descartes said, I think, therefore I am, what he ostensibly did was remove being from all non-humans.
Yeah.
Paving the philosophical road to commodify nature, to commodify the thing as nature, because you've just defined it by the thing that doesn't think. And so that poison has led to maybe some vision of it all burning, right? Of course, we could talk about the question of fire ecology, which I would love to. But now that we're in the 21st century, and I'm constantly encountering words like environmentalism, as if that means a thing, or even like conservationism. Conservation, which implies that nature is a resource to be spent and we must save some of it. I really love the word rematriation because it implies this human sense in this emerging Anthropocene that gets back to a tradition of motherhood and stewardship. Remember, stewardship, even over management. Management is a corporate word that implies subservience, right? Stewardship is a relationship. And I know there's lots of powerful women characters in your book.
In our culture, women pretty much ran the show. The grizzly bear, there were more people in this area anywhere else in the New World outside of the present site of Mexico City, which was the Aztec capital, but there were more grizzly bears. And the grizzlies really ran the show. And we had a lot of secret cults before the religion got kind of changed in the late 19th century. But there were a lot of secret cults, and the most powerful was the women's grizzly bear cult. And the women would, and the cults would don the grizzlies and go out and run, and they have all the songs of the grizzly. And it's for that reason we didn't have rape. There was no rape or the kind of sense of overpowering something. Everything had power, and you didn't know how it would come back on you. And a lot of the ethnographers, Obi, classified our religions and our culture as something predicated on black magic and fear. No, they were predicated on profound respect. Because again, the more different you were, the more unusual, and there's lots of things you didn't know about each person, which reminded you aren't the center of the universe.
Yes.
You are in a we relationship and not an us-them.
Yes.
And you start violating that, and you get in trouble, and you get corrected. And so,
corrected.
Yeah,
Right.
you get correct. We're in a huge correction right now,
Yes.
whether we like it or not. There is no wilderness. There's no environmentalism. There's here and now, all of us together. We say things went wild when we weren't taking care of the land.
Right.
We co-evolved.
Right.
Many things were happening because we were here. And if you just put things out there, and again, I've wrestled with a lot of environmental folks who want to restore things the way they were. They will never be. And that's a whole Western notion. We're always looking for somewhere else rather than here and now. Let's have a goal to fix this. And it's unfixable, or at least to a pre-contact world. There's too many things here. And let us not forget, as I said earlier, Obi, at least half of my blood is invasive species. So all these people going around wanting to fix things, we're invasive, but let's give ourselves a chance here. How can we all work it out together? They're not fighting in my blood. And yes, there was racism and rape and all of that brought all this different blood that's in me, but it's life. I'm still living, right? We're still here. So how do we, all this invasive species, How do we use those ethics and aesthetics of the old world of profound respect to create stories, models for our children and grandchildren? That's all we have to do. There's nothing else.
That's beautiful. Thank you, Greg. You know, the California grizzly bear.
I'm scared of them.
We're commemorating now 100 years without them. There's no living person that has ever seen one. Yeah. And I mean, mind you, a big California grizzly was 2,200 pounds, right? A big Kodiak brown bear is about 1,600 pounds, right? Yeah, that's 600 pounds it has on the biggest brown bear. But mind you, it was feeding on a people-sized salmon, right? Hundreds of thousands of them. I was thinking about this too.
So thick you could walk on their backs across a creek or water when they're spawning. Yeah.
Now, you know, we're talking about the end of salmon here, something that may or may yet come to pass. As long as there is time, there is hope. There's a very real temporal aspect to the idea of hope that way. And it's not just because of human impoundments, although that's explicitly the reason why our indigenous people who have been feeding our forests for about 10 million years. I mean, that's about how old the rivers in the west slope of the Sierra Nevada are. You know, the salmon lost a survival tool when it lost the grizzly bear. This is a recent.
And the redwoods lost a major nutrient when they lost the salmon.
And all of the conifer species, all of the forests of California did. When you think of these incredible bi-yearly migrations up the west slope of the Sierra Nevada to then deposit their mortal bodies in their regular anadromous lifestyle under the snow, then to then be dispersed in the spring flood to fill Tulare Lake and the Sacramento River Basin. Hundreds of thousands of metric tons of calcium, phosphorus, and nitrogen spreading all over the forest. Across a forest that looked much different than it looks today, being stressed, infirmed, overpopulated, and diseased. There's more trees now than there ever have been in California, as long as the California floristic province has been a thing, which is a terribly precarious situation and a support for Mabel's presumption there. Getting right with fire, getting right with apex predators, these things that settlers find so scary. And yet the endemic forces of nature don't seem to. You know, now we're I guess we're enjoying the proliferation of the black bear, Ursus americanus, and population's about 35,000 now, according to my friend David Bess with the California Department. That was much in the past 10 years. Their range has expanded, their population has exploded. You know, we think about hope, and we think about connectivity, you know, which is a preoccupation of mine. How do we? It's not just about quantity of landscape. It's not just about making a circle, like which was so much 20th century conservation policy. We're making a circle and we're going to protect that. You know, that turns out that's just an island of extinction, right? We need the sinews of corridors to talk between. We need connectivity between disciplines and between languages and between peoples too. It's between members of our own species, not just between habitat spaces, I guess is what I'm saying.
Well, I think it's important to, you know, one of the Western ways of thinking, if it's big and can overpower me, it's scary.
Yeah.
But remember, the air has spirit, water has spirit. And we always think we did that to the water. How about thinking that we messed up with the water and the water's now poisoning us? Give the water some power. Ultimately, it's going to win. All of these things that we think we have power over, they're going to win.
Water
right?
warriors, yes.
They have power. We always think it's us that fix this. We're doing that to that. But again, the indigenous way of thinking is that if you violate something, water or anything like that, it'll come back on you. The old people used to call the white people miracles, palacha. And I always used to say, why do you call the white people miracles? And they said, well, when they were coming, they were damming the water and killing things and killing people and chopping down the trees. And instead of getting punished as we thought we would, more of them kept coming. And we thought they were miraculous. But we found out less than 200 years later, nothing's miraculous. We're all the same. It's all coming back on us. There's not a square breath of air. There's not any water we drink today that's not coming back on us, poisoning us, getting back at us for what we're doing. And so pray, be good, be humble.
Pray, be good, fight for
Right?
water.
Yeah.
I feel like you're skirting around an idea that is a word that is difficult for the younger generations. Perhaps it's difficult for me to consider between the creep of nihilism. The word becomes a joke. I'm thinking of the word love. Mm-hmm. And the first line to my first book is that this is a love story.
Yeah.
And so engaging in unmitigated love as it inspires action leads me inevitably to meditations on what justice might be. As Dr. Cornel West reminds us, justice is what love looks like in public.
In action, too.
In action. Justice is what love looks like in action. That's absolutely applicable. Now, one of the great things that brings me hope is the work that you're doing with the kids in your community. And so describe that process, because I'm
Yeah, well, the tribe has had some fortunes. It's really strange. I'm basically a nerd. I was a professor, but somehow helping my dad's people, I ended up building a casino and a resort. And so a PhD in modern thought and literature becomes a casino mogul. But, and I was saying to somebody earlier, folks, maybe I could have written a couple more books. But we decided as a tribe, and my cousin is here, that if we had this opportunity, it would be something that would benefit Indian and non-Indian alike. And it would be something that would become a platform for social justice and environmental stewardship with the resources that we have. And create a new model of justice for the 2,000 people who work there that get the Kaiser Colt Cadillac plan and pay nothing out of their paychecks for full coverage. And the $19 million that we gave to UCLA Law School, and just announced this last week, $2.5 million to President Drake in perpetuity so that all California Indians can go to UC tuition free. So, you do what you can.
And that's regardless of federal status, right?
Yeah. Federally recognized or non-federally recognized, so that all of them, because again, that's just government stuff. So you do what you can, and I've understood that if corporations can undo from the inside, if businesses can undo from the inside, and not let the bottom line be about greed, but generosity and transformation, that's one way to work it. So 30 years later, Kathleen, I'm still here as the chairman of the tribe. But so again, but that's another story. And how do you take that? And, it's not going to go away. People said to me, oh, well, why'd you have to build a casino? And I said, well, how are we going to be able to have the money, the millions, the tens of millions of dollars that we've contributed, Obi, to the state park and all the Point Reyes, the co-management agreement, all these things? How are you going to do that? And they said, well, we're just going to get in front of the tractors and protest. And I said, we tried that in the 60s. You get run over, you get arrested, So as I jokingly say, if I can't buy social justice, or if I can't get social justice and environmental stewardship, now my tribe will buy it. and undo you that way. It's counter-capitalism or something.
Right. Well, money well spent is money well spent. I had the honor to be the artist in residence for the National Wildlife Federation, most recently in respect to the new project, which is the Wallace-Annenberg Wildlife Crossing across Highway 101 down there in Santa Monica Mountains. Yeah, it was fantastic. It'll be the largest wildlife crossing in the world. It's going across 10 lanes of traffic, and it's one piece of connective infrastructure that will save the southern population of California mountain lions. And and the thing about, we were talking about grizzly bears before, we still have this magnificent apex predator here, and engaging the role, the function, and the service that the predator plays within the ecosystem. It's a parade, a trophic cascade that benefits an incredible array of biodiversity. And the thing is that wildlife crossings work. And now we're getting one in Santa Cruz. Gavin Newsom was at the groundbreaking. I was there a couple of weeks ago, and he said that funding has been secured for 10 wildlife crossings a year across California for the next several years, and that legislation is in Sacramento right now such that no highway or road can be built again without wildlife crossing corridor mitigation established therein. So this is, we want to talk about the origin, the source, okay, so California's waking up to a new thing, a new story that we're telling ourselves about this place. I grew up backpacking like Big Sur in the 80s, and I thought nature was something that happened that I missed. There were no condors, there were no elk, there were no whales. To my eye, there were no Indians.
Not until there were casinos. Nobody in California thought there were Indians here until there were casinos.
That's a good one. That's a good one. But now all of those species and more are recovering. So what do we make of this? As now, for the first time, just last week, condors were released in conjunction with tribal biologists of the Yurok Nation that the largest land mammal in North America is flying over the tallest trees of the world once again right now. And if that's not a miracle of love and science and traditional ecological knowledge. It's like this excellent confluence, this vision that is extremely precarious, but hasn't it always been?
Well, yeah, and one last thing I think I want to say too is that, remember, in our point of view, all these things are people, and people in the old days could turn into them. So I think, some of these mountain lions, I don't know, they could be people.
They could be people.
There's a guy in the gym,
Marie Evangeliste, who's
seems to know. Yeah, the guy in your gym, the Mexican immigrant, could be a cougar.
Who said in your book, how can
break down the categories, folks?
How can people dance if they don't have feathers?
Yeah, our great grandmother said that she was born in the original village of Petaluma, which is about 3 miles this way.
That was Supa?
Supu, yeah.
Supu.
And around 14, General Vallejo's men captured her and took her into the fort, and they soldiers raped and used the Indian girls. And she escaped. They knew if they could get up to the Russian fort, at Fort Ross, and she walked 50 miles by herself up there. And she, of course, grew up in the traditions. And at a very old woman, they brought her back on the wagon into the valley, I guess, around. And they told her, she looked up and there were no condors. And she said, how are we going to dance? We don't have the feathers. We need the feathers to dance. And she said the people weren't going to dance anymore. They didn't have the feathers. But you know what? I'm kind of, Obi, I wonder if folks have questions before we get out here.
Yeah.
I
you
see
and I
all the eyes out
can
here.
talk all day.
So, I'm a professor. You're a scientist. I'm a professor. We talk. So you got to be careful.
I'm an artist. I think
An
one of
artist.
the reasons
Artist
why
talk, yeah.
my books really work is because I'm able to, like, at least wedge a little bit of light. I'm very sensitive to what both of those things are.
And I love the way you bring. I was just reading last night and over the weekend again, all the water book, California Water. All of the wonderful things you're saying about negotiating who and what you are as you're looking at these things and what it means. That's the blend, Obi.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, it has to be as
It is whether you like it or not.
right. As a man, as an artist who doesn't really identify with any, like, known community necessarily. I don't have a people that I can really decipher. I barely have a tradition that I can make out.
They're all
Right.
here.
And then they're all here. When Lindsay Bear, who's herself Paiute Shoshone with Heyday, she gave me this. I was so excited to contribute and help to the indigenous story as it was. Thinking about as I started talking about being really from this place. How can I be really from this place? I was thinking about my first edit of the field atlas, even dabbled into, like, taking back all the names. I know Malcolm Margolin has got a mapping project now that's really extensive and incredibly ambitious. But Lindsay stopped me and she said, slow down. Like, one, you're going to get these wrong. And two, this isn't your story to tell. Yeah. And that sort of like an artistic limitation, if you will, a creative boundary that really set me free therein to explore my own voice. And from there on out, I knew that it had to be a completely intimate narrative or nothing. Like, I'm inviting you to come with me. I'm not writing California nature textbooks.
But it's initiating a dialogue with you and the world. That's all we've got.
Very good.
Questions.
Questions, yes.
Or as I say to my students, answers.
Hi, Greg. Wendy from the Berkeley Times. I am really interested in what you started talking about, which is how stories are passed along, how stories change, and how they stay the same.
Big and good question. And I, so in the old days, there were, well, at least in our cultures, we only told the stories in wintertime, and they would change depending on the teller, and they still change. One of the big changes, of course, is the textualization of the oral tradition. So we're textualizing writing. Writing really changes that in lots of ways. And when I did stories of how a mountain was made, a cycle of creation stories, I kind of shaped them and used the bit of the Western tradition, a way to shape them in certain ways, using the same formula of a cycle. But they are in English and they sound different. And so we just have to acknowledge that. And then, of course, the wonderful thing is you'll have people in my family that says, oh, he doesn't know what he's talking about. And that's just more dialogue and keeps the stories going. But what is always there is the mountain, the rocks, the things to remind us. And no matter how we want to talk about that rock, that valley, those trees, as long as we're talking, that's what's important.
That's a good answer. I mean, there's different ways we tell stories in a community here and also across, like, societal levels at scale. I think of how the 19th century might have been an age of ideology or across the manifest destiny kind of paradigm. Moving into the 20th century is sort of the era of psychology. Now in the 21st century, there seems to be an era of ecology that's dominating all of the discourse. And that's not my theory. That's Jeremy Rifkin, who's one of the authors of the Green New Deal. Thinking of stories of resiliency, and I really love that word too, as we're moving into past the age of progress into the age of resiliency, which is probably an age that the indigenous peoples of California and beyond have been dealing with for 500 years, really, the age of catastrophe on some level, and yet are still here. And the sinew, it seems to me, is storytelling.
And the way you have a dialogical relationship with it, as Mabel once said to me, because everybody always wants to know, what does the story mean? What does the story mean? And she said, don't ask me what it means. Life will teach you about the story the way the story teaches you about life. And think about it. Read Romeo and Juliet when you're 16 and then read it when you're 80. Two different stories.
Yeah.
Hey. Well, thank you both for being here. This is just a really great conversation. I've just been devouring a bunch of your books, Obi, especially the water one.
Thank you.
And there's just so much in it that resonates in this way that other books and ideas haven't recently. The last one that has is Robin Wall Kimmerer's Braiding Sweetgrass, and I see a lot of kind of connections, imagining this future that doesn't exist, but hopefully we can make it exist. And I don't have a space in my life really to talk about that with a lot of people, because there's just like, I don't know, post-school, like you're not talking about that with your colleagues at work.
Yeah.
And I'm just curious if you guys, both of you, have ideas for like spaces where these conversations can happen, because I just feel like probably almost everyone in this room is craving that, and we don't quite know how to make it happen. Like, yeah, that's book clubs are definitely one idea. But yeah, if you guys have seen, either been a part of yourselves or know of other groups that are like, where are these conversations happening? So thank you.
We need that really badly. But I'm going to let you in on something that we're talking about, and we're going to make it happen. There's talk around Heyday or somewhere wild bound that you and I are going to do podcasts about the seasons. Conversations.
Yeah, we should. Yeah.
Wouldn't that be cool?
Right.
And everybody can join in. I think that would.
Well, the idea that there are different they're seasonally appropriate stories. This is from your book, right? Yeah. That the spring is for certain kind of stories. The summer is for a different kind of story, right? And I love that phenology, right? That calendric cycling through of the quality of our narrative. I think, to specifically answer your question, though, one of the things that I've been blown away by in the last 20 years that I've been actively studying it is the growing land trust movement. And even like the way that it is necessarily grassroots, right? It's not like some Washington-based NGO that's like deploying orders, right? This is people who are caring about that one grove of redwoods, or in the case of like the Sogoria Land Trust over here with Karina Gould, that is such an act of rematriation of reciprocity, to use Robin Wall Kimmerer's great meditation, the classic that is Braiding Sweetgrass, which is something to go back to again and again, and that's why she's still beating me on the top 10 bestsellers, because that is beautiful and worthy and quite the paradigm to look up to, and that great consilience between traditional knowledge and or indigenous knowledge and scientific botany in her case, but the land trust, there seems to be like a relaxing in land trust meetings about like political polarization, for one, and in that book you mentioned, The State of Water, Understanding California's Most Precious Resource, the book I wrote in 2019, I really sort of examine a little bit the way in which corporate agendas are keeping us intentionally in this mire of divisive rhetoric, right? Between urban and rural, southern and northern, big ones probably red and blue. And of course there's racial divides, economic divides, and all of this other stuff here too, that really, though, when you get down to it and you're in a room and you're having a dialogue, you begin to talk like Greg does here about doing the best you can. So I recommend joining your local land trust, getting involved there.
There's a question. Thank you for waiting.
Thank you. I'm Ira X. I am unregistered Choctaw Two-Spirit and African third gender invited warrior on Ohlone land. And I dream a dream where the salmon return to Strawberry Creek.
Yes.
Thank you so much for this talk. My child introduced me to Obi's books.
Oh, yeah?
I have 14-year-old twins who are growing up on the land, in the city, in the way that I did. I grew up on Tongva land.
Yeah.
And I'm very excited about the highway we celebrated in my family. Very big. And I also want to say that we are still in front of tractors. It's not just happening in the 60s.
It's true.
Like right now,
Yeah.
in front of tractors.
Bless you.
So I guess part of what I'm curious about is, as a warrior, as a fourth generation abolitionist, raising fifth generation abolitionists, as a medicine man for people of lost tribes, I am curious what you would have for us as we reclaim the nothing that we are from, again, into something that we were and are going to be, and how we start to build a tribe for folks whose tribes didn't even have 14 left.
Yeah.
So.
Thank you. Again, it hurts me to hear you say nothing, but you are everything, and don't forget that. And where you are and what you know can go backwards from what you can find out and learn, so that you'll understand and appreciate as much as possible, given what's been done to us, so many of us. And heal in a way that you believe nothing has been taken from you. Your ancestors, whoever they are, went through whatever they did so that you are here. And that is immense power. Think of that. And you're living it, and your children are living it. Keep that first. And then you're in a position to create a blueprint for the future. I mean, I think that's, I wrestle with that too. I mean, I was adopted by a white family, I'm old enough that on the birth certificate, when you adopted something in those days, of course, they would always have the race of the parent. And for father, it just said unknown, non-white, And supposedly he was Mexican. They didn't know the difference here between Mexican or Indian or any of that. And so, it's always negotiating. And I always wrestle with this huge issue of illegitimacy as adopted, as being too dark or too light or whatever. And we do that within our own ranks. I mean, when I was young, they'd say you're Spanish or say you're Mexican. Why do you have to say you're Indian? And then, of course, the AIM movement comes along and they say, march in the back, you're too light. That's that whole pattern of continuing delegitimizing those within our ranks. That's the Western stuff. That's bullshit, And I stand with you right here to say that. So kick it and kick it forward. You've got kids. You owe it to them.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful. Thank you.
Yeah.
Hi there. I have been thinking about a few things as you've been speaking. Very interesting. A couple of threads. First of all, I've heard it said that a weed is just a plant in the wrong place. So, having that in my head already before this talk, I was thinking about the bridges that we've been talking about over highways and other things that have been disrupting migration patterns in terrible ways that have affected the populations of animals that we love, like the elk and like the mountain lion. And the aspect of also what you said earlier about we need to remember that we can't fix anything, that we are here right now, and this is our now, and we have to just say, we're here now, we're going to live the best life we can. So here's my question, which I've thought about before too. There are unintended consequences, of course, of any action that we take, particularly any modification of the environment. So when we're talking about the land bridges, we're so excited about the mountain lion. We are so thrilled about the elk. But we're not talking about the coyotes and the rats and, for example, pigeons that we might also be encouraging in some way. And I think that's a big part of our Western culture, is that we pick the heroes in any kind of a dynamic. And then we just, the rest of it doesn't exist, but it does. That's the now. So I'm really curious, in your experiences, both of you, in different ways in life, where have you encountered a situation or people or community that have been able to look at the whole thing and not demonize a part of whether it's a plant community or a human community?
I don't know that, I can't answer your question directly, but I can talk about a worldview. And I'm going to go back again to the old indigenous worldview here, that everything, the smallest bird, the mouse, had power, as much power as the thing that had physical power. The Western world champions physical power. And they miss the power of a pebble. They miss the power of a worm. They miss the power of a beetle or a spider. They miss those kinds of things that they can step on. So they look at the kinds of things again, and it's all part of whole. I mean, if you don't know what you can do with a bird or power, it has with its power. So I think it's more of looking and understanding a different worldview and trying to operate from there, remembering those things. And of course, there are, as you say, the elk or the cougars, but I don't want to be negative here, but make all the land bridges you want, feed all the cougars you want, and the minute they start getting in somebody's backyard or killing a kid, they're going to get killed. Okay? And then I hear all of the stuff, because we've been feeding the elk down in Point Reyes. The tribe's been feeding the elk that are there that need the resources. And of course, the environmentalists want to get rid of all the dairies, and the dairies are problematic in my point of view in multiple ways. But they want to take out all the fences, but there's no predators for the elk. And if you get the grizzly bears and the cougars back down there, how many people in Marin County are going to think that's cool, all those animal lovers? It's amazing. People are so wonderful. We love nature as long as it's not in my backyard. Indians, they love us when it's a question, woe, the poor fallen nature gods. Isn't it sad? They love their art and their baskets. But as soon as it becomes a question of power or territory, we become wagon burners. The same with animals and everything else in this world. We love them, adore them, but once they enter our space and threaten us, right? What do we do about that?
Yeah. I see a strange overlap actually between the last two questions there.
Yeah.
About how do we interact, how do we interface, how do we describe our relationship to the world, to one another. As Shelley said, poets are the unacknowledged legislators of the world. And right now we have our first Native American woman poet laureate, national poet laureate, Joy Harjo. And I have not encountered a poet perhaps ever, who's making work right now for me, and by me I mean you, like the navigation tools that she's offering me in this description about the sensitive and intimate connection between things, how trauma is written on the land, and especially in the wake right now of Murdered and Missing Women, Indigenous Women's Day on 2 days ago. Speaking that truth to power, I think of other poets too. Like we're both heyday authors. Our great heyday, yes, round of applause for heyday. We got many heyday people in the house. I think Steve's here. But I know Deborah Miranda is speaking at some point in the festival here, and if you can go to see her and listen to her, you would be smart, and pick up a copy of Bad Indians published by Heyday 2, because that is a piece that it freed a splinter in my heart that I didn't know was there. That, I mean, I'll work on it forever, but at least I can identify it now. Any more questions? Are we wrapping up? What are we doing?
We're getting a choke sign.
We're getting a time? Oh yeah, so we're going to be signing our books out front. Greg and I will be sitting out there. Really look forward to meeting every single one of you, and please buy our books. And I've got a little card with my email on it if you guys want to email me. I'm just sitting around waiting for your email.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much.